Hello, class. So today we're going to talk about Chapter 16, and Chapter 16 is Monopolistic Competition. So we're going to look at certain aspects of monopolistic competition. So we're going to see what structure lies between perfect competition and monopoly, and what are their characteristics. So one of them is monopolistic competition, the other one is oligopolies. We're going to see how do monopolistically competitive firms choose their price and quantity, and how do they earn profits, or do they earn any kind of economic profit? We're going to see how does monopolistic competition affect society's welfare, and we're going to look a little bit about the social costs and benefits of advertising. So monopolists, so far we studied the two extremes in market structure, perfect competition and monopoly. So perfect competition had many firms, identical products. Monopoly basically had just one firm. In between these two extremes, we have something called imperfect competition. So one kind of market structure that we will study in the next chapter is oligopoly, which is basically a very few sellers who offer similar or very identical products. And the other kind is monopolistic competition, which is basically firms that they they sell very similar products, but they're not identical. So there is some degree of product differentiation between sellers. So what are the characteristics? So the characteristics are many sellers. There is product differentiation. There is free entry and exit. And the examples we have, well, apartment blocks. So there are many sellers, but there are different kinds of product differentiation between apartment blocks. So some apartments have a pool or better gym, or probably will have a washer dryer hookup or even washer dryer installed. So there are different ways apartments try to differentiate themselves. Books, textbooks are pretty much the same thing. Basically, we're using Mankey's textbook here, but there are 10, if not hundreds, there are tens of different authors of principles of economics textbooks. So all those books are monopolistically competitive. Basically, they are teaching the same product. If you pick up a book by Frank Wood and you look at Mankey's book, basically they talk about the same thing, but it is they try to differentiate based on certain aspects. Probably certain things about the way they explain is slightly different, and that's how they try to do that. Bottled water, clothing, fast food, they're all pretty much the same thing. McDonald's burger and a Burger King burger, I mean, they're pretty similar. They're not exactly the same, so they try to differentiate themselves that way. Same thing goes with nightclubs. So what's the difference? Number of sellers are both many for perfect competition and monopolistic competition. There is free entry and exit. So for most firms, for most industries that are operating in monopolistic competition, you do have free entry and exit. In both cases, since there's free entry and exit, if current firms are earning a profit, then that would encourage firms to enter the market in the future. So in the long run, the economic profits for both perfect competition and monopolistic competition is close to zero. The products they sell are, for perfect competition, they're identical. For monopolistic competition, they're differentiated. So think about it. I mean, a t-shirt from Banana Republic is very similar to a t-shirt from Express or even from Gap, but they are differentiated. Even though Gap and Banana Republic are owned by the same company, even there you have differentiation, slightly differentiated products. So the products they sell have certain qualities that makes them differentiated. If the firm has market power for perfect competition, no, they don't. For monopolistic competition, they actually create market power. So they create a brand and they make people aware of that brand so that people are more interested to purchase those products. So demand curve facing the firm, yes, there is a market demand curve and an individual demand curve. For the individual firm, in perfect competition, the demand curve is horizontal, but for monopolistic competition, it is downward sloping. The number of sellers, when we compare monopoly and monopolistic competition, there's just one seller in monopoly. There are many sellers in monopolistic competition. There is no free entry and exit in monopoly, but there is in monopolistic competition, as we talked about in the last chapter. Monopolies have barriers to entry, but monopolistic competition do not have barriers to entry. Long-run economic profits are positive or zero, or positive for monopoly, but zero for monopolistic competition. In both cases, the firms have market power. In both cases, the firm have a downward sloping demand curve. But for substitutes, for monopoly, there aren't that many substitutes. But for monopolistic competition, there are many substitutes available. So what does a monopolistically firm face in the short run? In the short run, it faces a downward sloping demand curve, just like a monopoly. The marginal revenue curve is also downward sloping, and it's below the demand curve. The marginal cost curve is upward sloping, and the average total cost is U-shaped. So at each quantity, marginal revenue is less than price for the monopolistically competitive firm. And the way it maximizes profit is just the same way as before. It first chooses the quantity where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, and then it finds out, goes up to the demand curve to figure out at what price should it sell the product. So after it determines the price, it checks, okay, what is the average cost of producing the product? So what is the cost per unit of production? And then the profit is basically the area that we see, so the orange rectangle. So in the short run, it could earn profits. In the short run, it could also earn losses. If price is great or is less than average total cost, then we can see that the monopolistically competitive firm might earn losses. It first chooses its price and quantity, and then it figures out whether it's earning a loss or not. So in the short run, it can earn losses, as we saw before, if a firm should shut down or when a firm should exit the market. So in this case, it is earning losses. And probably it's enough losses that doesn't require a complete exit, but it does probably have a shutdown. So for monopolistic competition and monopoly, in the short run, the monopolistic competitive firm and the monopoly they are very similar in behavior. So they earn very similar so they earn or their profit structure or the way we calculate profit is similar. However, in the long run, because of entry and exit, the economic profit goes to zero. That doesn't happen for monopoly because a monopoly is the only firm in the market. There are barriers to entry, so it can keep on earning profits in the future. If there is profit in the short run for a monopolistically competitive firm, new firms enter the market, taking demand away from existing firms, so prices and profits fall. If there are losses in the short run, then for a monopolistically competitive firm, some firms exit the market and the remaining firms enjoy higher demand and prices. So in the long run, because of entry and exit, the price that they charge equals to the average total cost. And so the average total cost curve is tangent to the price or to the point where the price is being chosen. So the average total cost is tangent to the demand curve at the profit maximizing price. So there is a market that it does still charge over that is basically higher than the marginal cost curve. So even though the last unit requires only MC for production, the price it charges is much higher. So why is monopolistically competitive firm less efficient than perfect competition? Well, one, because it has excess capacity. It is not operating at the lowest possible average total cost curve. It produces at a point that is less than cost minimizing. Under perfect competition, the firms produce at a quantity that minimizes the average total cost, but here it doesn't. And there is a markup over marginal cost, even though the last unit requires MC units, MC dollars to produce, the price that the monopolistically competitive firm charges is higher than that. Under perfect competition, price equals marginal cost, so there is a difference there. So even though monopolistically competitive markets do not have all the desirable properties, they do not maximize the welfare to the maximum extent, but they're still better than monopolies. So because price is greater than marginal cost, market quantity is less than socially efficient quantity. However, it is not easy for policymakers to fix the problems. So even though, they are charging a price that is higher than marginal cost, the problem is they're earning zero economic profits in the long run. So you can't really require them to reduce prices, and that would be too much interference of the government in the markets, and so that's probably not desirable. But one thing that does drive up prices or cost for monopolistically competitive industries is because they want to differentiate themselves from other competitors, so they have to use advertising. If you look at firms that advertise, you don't see Farmer Joe advertising his potatoes. You don't see Duke Energy advertising, or you don't even see Boeing advertising their 777s. What you see advertisements of is mainly fast food chains or of clothing companies. So if you go through and look at what companies usually advertise, a lot it's mainly those companies that have a lot of competitors. So in general, the more differentiated the products, the more advertising firms buy. So economists kind of disagree about really what does advertising do to us. So one of the criticism of advertising is we're wasting resources. We're not using that money could have been used to improve the actual quality of the product, but instead we're just using it to basically portray this is what we have, or this is what the product entails. Firms advertise to manipulate people's taste. They don't really add any value. They're just manipulating people's taste. And we have that advertisement or that commercial that we saw on TV that actually encouraged us to become loyal to the brand. And advertising impedes competition. It creates a perception that the products are more differentiated than they really are. Technically, there is really no difference between McDonald's and Burger King burgers, and they're pretty similar, yet through advertisements and through the way they give us the message, they actually create the perception that the products are more differentiated than they really are. Of course, there are some defenders, but it helps. Advertisement also provides useful information to buyers. Informed buyers and can make um, basically can make more informed decisions about whether they should purchase the product or not. So in that case, people who support advertising, they believe that advertisement promotes competition and reduces market power. The result of a prominent study that they looked at is that eyeglasses were more expensive in states that prohibited advertising by eyeglass makers than in states that did not restrict those kind of advertising. So advertising does help to bring in more competition. People can make more informed choices, so that can help to reduce prices. That's one side, or that's in defense of advertising. Now we have brand names. In many markets, brand name products coexist with generic ones. Usually firms that have a brand name, and you can always see this, Coca-Cola or Coke products or products made by Coca-Cola are slightly more expensive than generic brands. And firms with brand names usually spend more on advertising, charging a higher price for the products. Of course, as in advertising, there is a disagreement whether there should be so much spending on companies to protect or to improve their brand recognition. There are a lot of questions about that. And so this is all we have for monopolistic competition, since it's very similar to Monopoly in the short run, and in the long run, we just have price equal to average total cost. So it's a very short chapter, but it's one of those things that we see a lot around us. So, and next time we are going to talk about oligopolies. Well, have a good rest of the day. I'll see you later.